everyone. Thank you so much for being on this podcast, Kalpa. We actually previously discussed this earlier, and I'm really excited that we finally are able to have this recording. So I guess the first thing that I would want to ask you is, can you provide a short introduction about yourself, background, your interests, what you're up to right now?
Hi, Christine. I'm so excited to be here, and I'm glad that we are recording today. I am the founder of Knekxt, which is a consulting company which helps our clients build trust, mitigate risk, and grow in profitability with equity in mind, right? And we serve both large corporations for consulting, as well as I'm also a childhood sexual abuse survivor. So I also bring that work to create safe spaces, masterminds, and forums for coaching other client executives and business owners. And really briefly about me, I started my career in research and consulting in NCAR, which is a leading think tank in India. And then I moved to the US about 16 years ago. I had left my corporate job with GE back then. And then I studied here again, went back to the grad school, and have worked in the last 10, 15 years with companies such as, American Express, Zelle, Early Warning, and brief stint with healthcare, but primarily in the last decade being in product and product-related roles.
Amazing. And an icebreaker that I always ask every guest on my podcast is, if you had all the time in the world, what would you be doing?
Exactly what I'm doing right now. I love connecting. I love talking to people, and I love showing up because I feel like I have such wide kind of experiences and such unique kind of stories. I want people like me who've had similar journeys, and I don't mean just people like me who look and feel or even the same. There are so many lived experiences. The more we share, we sometimes are giving that hope to others, giving them a way of being. And I love meeting interesting people, such as yourself.
Thank you. Yeah, this is always an interesting question because I usually get two types of response. One is oh, what I'm doing right now, and that ended up being what you were going for. And the other one is oh, I would rather do something that's not work related or something that is completely work related. It's always an extreme over there. So I guess in the past, was this something that you wanted to always do, or do you feel like you're still getting there, that you, wherever you want to be, that you still have a little bit more to go before you get there?
So I've had a lot of life awakening, and I feel like my decades of wisdom have condensed into short, sporadic, every 2, 3 years. I feel like I'm living another decade. I couldn't have fathomed the kind of things that I've done in the last 20 years since when I started my career. So really, after 15 years of achieving, I couldn't escape the constant questioning of self, feeling of never being enough, having a lot of shame around many things in life, and seeing the same trauma triggers show up in my work environment, right? So, which is what ultimately led me to quit my corporate job a few years ago, and really did a soul searching through fast forward, through hours of therapy, coaching, deep conversations with my husband, and, a lot of soul searching. I created this company, right, to help people deeply connect and transform their relationship with themselves, so that the workplace, and then also for businesses, so that they can create the places where more people feel like they belong.
And that actually leads to my next question, which is, you're the founder and consultant for Knekxt, helping trailblazing organizations leverage market trends early, focusing on building trust and solving problems through data and insights that matter most, that grow profitably and equitably. How are you doing that, and what exactly is your story? How did Knekxt come to be?
So so I had quit the corporate job about 4 years ago, and I was in that transition moment and going, do I want to take up another job, or what do I do? And really, I was burnt out, right? So I was in the middle management. I was already a director at the time, and I created Knekxt to say, what is next for Kalpa, which is where the name comes from. And then I was seeking deep connection with myself in all my relationships with the people that I work in. So I was running towards that, a little bit of running away from, and over time it became clear on what I was running from, which I always had in me, right? So the company as it exists today, fast forward now, and in the meantime, I again took, I did some assessment with my coaches, like on what kind of environments that I am going to thrive and what is my purpose, right? Doing a lot of that work. And what I realized is what gives you pain gives you purpose, right? So for me, and then I was very high on entrepreneurial, some of the traits, risk taker, always wanting variety and having bigger impact in life, right? So, but I wasn't ready at the time to create full jump in. So I took another role, which was where, and this time I was choosing my boss, right? Choosing the type of people that I wanted to work versus, a brand or anything, right? So, and that's been my journey in the last, if I have to give any advice to anyone, like always choose the people that you want to work with and be conscious of what is the brand that you're creating, because over time you become the brand. So now as the company stands as of now, so that company did restructuring last year, and I got laid off along with many others. And honestly, that hasn't hit me as it would have in a prior past life, because I knew what I was going to do. So that's when I decided to take fully go in this way. So we now work. So we have corporate clients where we provide consulting to small to medium sized companies on product strategy, and we partner with really value aligned leaders. Right. And then number two, we also create masterminds for executives and business owners. So Christine, I don't know how many of the in the audience know, but 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys are abused sexually before they are 18 years of age. Right? What that means globally is we have at least a quarter of world's population who's a survivor of childhood sexual abuse. I have personally done surveys in the last, few, much time with some of the audiences, and about at least over 200 people. These are women in mid-career, senior execs and business owners. And 60% of the audience has said that either they or someone they know were abused in childhood. And we don't know how much trauma we are carrying. And sometimes we hide behind achievements, or other coping mechanisms, and we don't realize that we are driven by the same survivor that triggers. So I create spaces for executives and women where they can be vulnerable. They feel their inner child is finally seen, and they can accept themselves fully, so they can show up boldly, because we are survivors are beautiful, we have achievement. So that's what we do, through the company, and that's been very fulfilling. And as I show up more, organically, they say, entrepreneurship is also a path to spirituality, right? So all your fears show up. So what I notice as I am showing up more vulnerably, there have been other entrepreneurs who wanted to understand my, success formula. And so I also offer private coaching for anyone who's interested, to live more authentically, right? And create offerings.
So you kind of touched a little bit on this, but how would you say trauma like that usually affects someone later down the line in their career?
That is such a great question, right? So, so there's some great books on this, for more research. I'll share those. One is a Drama of the Gifted Child. My favorite is also Body Keeps the Score, which is trauma, essentially, your 0 to 8 years of age are your foundational, right? So children are taking the infant as in mother's womb. They are carrying on a lot of intergenerational things, right? We think sometimes in our lifetime, oh, it's just me, but that affects our children, how we are wired, how I am being when I'm pregnant, am I in that fight or flight mode constantly? So that plays a role. So sometimes you would realize when we get triggered, it's a question to ask, what is it in that person or that external situation that I felt triggered? Because usually there is something in us that reminds us of exactly a similar time. Either we were felt not seen, not heard, not believed, not loved. It's one of those 4 usually at a certain point in our life. So that's number one. Number two, how our caregivers, how our basic needs were met or not. And beyond sexual abuse, there are all kinds of adverse childhood experiences, whether it's, parents emotionally abused or physically abused, or there was alcohol in the household consumed, or so there are many other cases, and that has impact on the health outcomes of children, right? So 2 times people, this is for listeners who might be in their mid-20s or 30s, or maybe 40 or 50 or beyond, right? Two times that we are more often to feel triggered is when in our path to our parenthood, when our child becomes the same age when we were abused. So in my case, that was when my son was 3 or 4, it was like really triggering, and that's when everything fell apart, and I realized how some of the ways I was being, and doesn't mean that there wasn't any other external things, bullies or other toxicity in the environment, and the fact was that I hadn't healed myself. So that is number one. And number two, when it shows up, is typically when your children go through sexuality, right? So either they are teens, or you see them experience that's when you feel triggered. So for listeners, and then the average age people share their trauma is 52 years old, right? So there's a lot of deep shame, guilt, and blame that is associated. And often people are carrying, low self-worth. There's this feeling of always not feeling enough, and always, disconnected, right? That feeling is there.
Mm-hmm. And you said that you're creating these safe spaces for women to share this. How exactly are you doing that? Is it like through a Zoom call, or in person, or a community?
Sure. People can find more information on my website, but essentially right now what I have created is virtual, because we know a lot of people can't travel still, and women predominantly. It is challenging being mother and not having additional healthcare or support sometimes. So right now the mastermind it's a 90-day mastermind where people with certain qualifiers who are outwardly successful but feeling disconnected, I create that forum. So it's mostly, from a form perspective, is virtual calls and accountability with the group. But in future, there would be an in-person component. So the one that's launching in October also has an in-person component optional. That's like they can travel to this location to TBD. With the attendees. So really, I think the intention, though, Christine, on that question is, and for the mastermind, is to shift their identity from shame, blame, and guilt, right? And I use this example, right? I would talk to people and they're like, oh, great, you're doing great. And oh, this happened to me. Somebody kissed me, it was an uncle, and I guess it's not as bad. And then I would ask them the question, okay, if somebody were to do that to your child, 4-year-old or 5-year-old, would that be okay? If not, your boundaries were crossed. You may not have realized, but one way or the other, it was hard for you to trust people. You probably questioned, well, did that even happen? Or, so the intention, and the more you share and create that space, right, with people in business particularly, right? I don't know the very many people who are actually telling their stories, right? Beyond. So I think that needs to change. So that's the intention here. The more I can create that whole, that, as trailblazing, with leaders, I can create that space. We will save our children, our, sisters and granddaughters, and another friend and colleague. Right?
Mm-hmm. That's amazing. And just a little bit more about your career. So you were also in strategy, consulting, and diverse operation roles in product management, marketing, and analytics, and fraud risk management. So what made you take the leap in starting your own business? Was it that you got laid off and then now you're like, okay, well, maybe this is the time to do it? Or was there a particular trigger?
So I was always, so you can see from my background, I love variety, right? I was always on. So my learning is my number one value, and I always want to solve a problem, right? So any role that I've taken, it's the first question I ask is, what is the problem we are trying to solve for? So my early career, I've studied economics. So it's funny, like I'm just reflecting back. So earlier on, it was very much research and consulting in a research environment. And then the corporate job That transition was very much, hey, now I need to pay my bills, right? After you're completing your graduation. And then the experience was amazing because I learned I would provide marketing analytics and consulting to GE's CMOs, which were multi-billion-dollar business units, probably $35 billion, business units of their own, like in assets, right? So I learned from the best essentially in terms of the frameworks. And when I moved to Amex here in US, it was in the middle of financial crisis, and I had some prior relevant experience, and I joined like their fraud risk management unit, and it was really the timing. It was a good fit from that perspective, because risk management, I learned how important it is, for protecting your digital kind of identity, essentially. And you're seeing now, right? Fast forward 10 years later, any transaction you go, your identity and your fraud, it just goes hand in hand from a business perspective. So, and then the entrepreneurship questions, I think it's been a natural evolution, Christine. I don't know that as a child I knew that I was going to be this entrepreneur, and life doesn't happen always that way. I love those people who know exactly when they were born, like they're going to be this. But and I think that's the myth that we sell to students, right? At age 16 or 20 or 22, you're supposed to figure life out. That doesn't happen. You go through evolution. Each life, probably it's almost like 9 cats, like cats have 9 lives, right? I think like I probably have like 10 or 20 lives in this lifetime. So for me, entrepreneurship was, as I said, like I was naturally curious, and I felt like the corporate ladder, particularly being a woman, an Indian woman, people of color, right? That I didn't feel I belonged. In some places, I did face microaggression, toxicity. And at some point, I wonder like what was going on in my life that I was tolerating for so long, right? And I give grace to people who were there, like they did the best they knew. But at the same time, I wasn't meant to fit in a box. So I created my box where I can show up fully the way I am, with all my accent, with my life experience, right? With the passion that I bring to solve real life, real world problems.
Mm-hmm. So I wanted to go into this a little bit more because your job right now is very focused on product management, and then there's also entrepreneurship of like having your own consulting firm. So I guess in this case, for people who don't know, what exactly is product management in your own words?
So product management, I think the same first question I said, which is for me, it's what problem are you trying to solve for? And why is that solution essentially, how are you solving for that solution in a way that your customers are going to pay for it, right? And then your business can sustain. So these are like very basic product and strategy questions. So for me, product management is it sits at the cusp of like, your business acumen, your technology, your UX, all of these skills that you bring in to make those decisions, right? And product managers, so that's in a nutshell what it is. Like your products got to get sold, but why does the company exist? So for me, the product management role sometimes is the role of also like mini CEOs who essentially, and I know a lot of people don't like it, but that's how I have operated, like from any of the product, whether it was at Amex or whether at Zelle, like really taking a full view of where is that product, how is that tied to the revenue that you generate, like whether it's the complete rates, and what is the product? Because in a large enterprise, you might have multiple things that go towards the external customer facing products. So, but essentially in product management, you're always going back to what is the problem you're trying to solve for and for who, and how do you solve it in a way that it meets the your company is viable, right?
So how did you get into this field, or at least find out about it? It seemed like you were kind of more in the financial industry. Was it just like, oh, I heard about this role that is where I can basically solve problems as my job? Is that like, how exactly did you find it and find your first step, I guess?
Yeah, so I think I was probably the early, so I ended up in product management. I think, so most of my roles, I asked the same question, right? Whether I was in fraud or whether before that research And then the first role that was not called product management, but it was called like a capabilities architect, like a product. It was part of the marketing platform management team where I ended up. This was this was, I think, back in 2012, 13. Now I'm drawing a blank, like close to a decade ago now. I was managing the marketing platforms, right, through which we were engaged with customers, globally. And the role wasn't called product management, but essentially what we were doing is to agile product development, moving from waterfall to agile product development and upskilling our teams, right? Doing a lot of the UX and all that training to kind of just be that product, early adopters of product within the financial companies. And Amex, is well known for that, right? So they are like really early adopter in terms of the experience. So I think that I was at the forefront of that from a marketing capabilities perspective. And then I got the director role, where really the right opportunity arose, and because given my experience in acquisitions and risk, that was the perfect role where I was managing the experience for globally for the assisted sales as well as partnership channels. So and then with Zelle, literally the role was called product management, right? So I would say all of those are product management roles, but it's just that each company is at a different point in time on where they are in the industry, and then with respect to tech companies, right? So from a financial, so I think all of that role has played a part here. I simply just landed there by being curious, and one thing I would add, I didn't want to be the one to do the analytics or do the things where somebody's saying, here's the problem, you do this and somebody else presents and you have no control over. I wanted to be the one to figure out what problem is important and where do we need to focus and set all that strategy. So I think over time, I essentially move into that path. But if you had asked me like 10 years ago, I wouldn't be able to articulate that clearly.
Yeah, actually, like one thing that I think is interesting is that no one majors in product management. No one even starts a job in product management right off the bat, but like usually they have to start with no experience and then find other ways that have that transferable skills or experiences. So in this case, how would you recommend someone with no product management experience getting into product?
So that's a great question, right? So one of the things, and there are several ways it can happen. So in my case, we did a lot of certifications within the company. For example, on UX, like we brought other great reputed kind of companies to upskill, hold those trainings. We did other work which was sponsored by companies, some in our own private kind of time, right? Also, and same in all of my career later on, especially where I was also managing teams, product and design teams. So if somebody were to start their career now, there are certifications by some colleges and some universities which are very specific in product management. And we've also hired analysts in the past, or people fresh out of college after undergrad degrees from various disciplines. It can go from economics to industrial engineering to some engineering, right, into the product like analyst roles. And then eventually, as they manage the Scrum, as they manage the some of the processes with other product management, they get into those roles. I would say there are a lot of transferable skills, right? So if you have already started your job and don't feel disheartened, right? So some of the transferable skills are being able to communicate with other people, right? Because the product manager's role is very much like the glue in an ecosystem. So you've got to have good relationships. You need to be able to reach out to people, be proactive, right? And work in ambiguity. And I say that with a lot of awareness that ambiguity can cause trauma for many people, and it's right. So it is. I'm not saying that your job definition is not clear, but just know that most companies that I've worked with, most people that I talk to, often you do need to be the one to go and find and ask those questions, because everybody's coming and bringing that input and they are relying on you. So transferable skills, your communication, your relationship building, your being proactive, if you're good with any kind of data and user experience, computer design, and all that, it only adds to that, right? So you come from any discipline. Let me say that again. You can be an engineer, you can be a designer, you can be a business totally person coming from that. All you need is that really curiosity at the end of it, and that willingness to learn and and see, upskill yourself.
And I guess for those that are interested, why should someone pursue product management? Also, why should someone not pursue product management?
So I would say pursue. It's a very personal decision, right? What drives? Because not everybody, but most of the audience, if they are listening to you, some shape or form, they might be interested in product, right? So this is where a lot of the jobs are growing. If you look like if you just take a step back, right? There's a problem each company is trying to solve, whether they are entrepreneur or they are big, large, mid-sized companies or large corporates. And then the form factors have changed. The way you reach your audience is no longer the direct mail it's a digital way for most parts. We've all seen how Zoom has kind of, the fact that you and I are having a conversation on this is even a miracle, right? So how do you engage? What are those features that your customers need? So these are all the questions that, these are all exciting things to me, because whether you work in product or not, you experience technology, you experience somebody's, selling something, and you are trying to engage. So if you are passionate about that and you want to, serve and connect with customers in one way or the other, product just feels the right place to be, right? Because you get to be at the cusp of that, what is it that you need to build, learn, and continually evolve, continually learn, because these things only keep changing. And so I guess I didn't give an answer on why you shouldn't pursue. I think one thing would be, and I say that with utmost, candor, is if you're not comfortable with ambiguity, right? If you're not not lifelong learner, right? And you want to say, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? The product management is probably not the right place for you, right? So it is, because there's a lot, like I don't think by the time I started my career there, and where I kind of left off, at least in the corporate setting, or even now as consulting, I am continually learning, so that I don't know. And maybe those answers are also for other disciplines, right? Those are must-have in today's, future of work, essentially.
So I guess piggybacking off of that, what do you think are the misconceptions of product management out there?
Sometimes people confuse product management with project management, and I have been in many different situations where essentially it's not, we call this product management, but people are managing essentially projects, right? And I'll give you examples. So for example, when you're not clear on, when you launch something, what is that end result to your customers' lives, just because somebody said, hey, this project needed to get done, that's, you're managing to a project, versus if you can drive certain outcomes, right, with a better solution, with a better technology or a better design that's come up, if your company or your organization is not open, they're probably not managing their products. They are doing project management, at least the function, right? So, and I see that often, even in many different, even within the organizations, many different groups operate differently. So the misconception is that it's the same. It's not. And then the other myth would also be that sometimes there's this unicorn that we are all looking for in product. I don't know that I can qualify all the personas in terms of the way they have, what their journey has been, their skill sets. I can probably give a general persona on the skills, their soft skills, or which are really hard skills, right, for product management. But there's no typical candidate, right, who's in product.
Yeah. So I was always a little bit curious about this, but your consulting firm, you're consulting people on product management. how exactly is that working? Is that like you are playing as a product manager in their team, or you're even helping them out on like what they can do with their actual product managers? Like what exactly is the business model of how that works?
Yeah, so there are a couple of ways, right? So the primary way right now, what I do is I am advisor to some of the strategy firms where if their end clients are other founders, other startups or mid-sized, growth stage companies which are raising funds. So as they are looking to see where their focus needs to be for their fundraise, or they would engage me in terms of with my expertise, right? So that's one way I serve my clients. The other way is there are sometimes companies who are not yet ready to hire like a full-time CPO, and so then I come on their team as a fractional CPO to be able to set the strategy and kind of define what kind of a person needs to be there, and so on, and bridge that gap, right? Because a lot of the times they are driven by the technology founders with no, and nothing wrong with that, but sometimes you do need that business and design and all of that experience, right? So that's what I bring to, and I think it's working fairly well. I have seen the recessions and then the tough markets sometimes are the best opportunities for when you're creative.
So you're saying that like right now, when a lot of people may be a little bit scared about like losing their jobs, you're flourishing because they're like, oh, how do I basically manage our product a little bit better so that way our bottom line is better?
Yeah. And then also in terms of like when you are somewhat, when you have less resources and scrappy, your comes up. I say that personally, like also, right? Because that's when you are willing to take risk, when your survival is threatened sometimes. And as you get bigger and more resources, you tend to become complacent. So I see a lot more creativity in that ecosystem, small to medium sized enterprises. Yes, big companies, large companies are doing many things, but then they also are risk averse at times, late adopters sometimes, and they can finally afford to waste resources cannibalizing their own sales versus medium to small to mid-size, you'll simply be out of business. So you really got to focus on that is going to move the needle for you and your customers.
Mm-hmm. So I'm always a little bit curious about how all these entrepreneurs do this, but it is notorious that when you're an entrepreneur, you're not actually working 9 to 5. You're working like night, morning, even in the middle of the night, because technically you are your own boss. Whatever you're doing, it is directly tied towards the income of the company. So how exactly are you balancing everything while being a product manager or a fractional CPO, or even being an entrepreneur in this entire consulting firm, or even doing everything else that you're doing outside of it?
Well, so I don't do everything on my own, right? So as I'm thinking of these things, I'm very conscious of the hours I work and when I work, the kind of projects I take on. And I have my team for support. Like I have VA, like I partner with others to delegate certain things. So the myth that we have, right, with our small businesses is you got to do everything. And that is true. But then you don't survive. Most of the businesses go out of some startups go out of business within the first 3 years because and many a times because you are not building and hiring team also fast enough, right? So because you're so caught up in the fulfillment of that you're not thinking how do you scale. It's some of the same mistakes that you make within the large company. So I have been very diligent in bringing that learning from my large corporate experience, that as I'm thinking about what are key priorities and areas, I also bring in those teams to partner, whether a digital agency for my website, whether VA to delegate certain tasks. So I am free to do most value-added work as the CEO of the business, which is bringing in businesses and showing up where I need to be connecting with people and providing my insights and coaching and mentoring the rest of my team to be able to deliver.
So on the same page, how is it like being a woman, immigrant, and minority in corporate America as an entrepreneur, as a consultant, in your past life, as in your career, and even right now?
Wow, I feel like that question alone could be probably topic for another podcast, right? There's so many different ways we can go on that. Look, I recognize my privilege, right? Despite everything that I've shared, like I get to be in one of the lands with the most opportunities, right? Today. It may not feel like when we hear a lot about politics, a lot about, some of the things and the workplaces and how, we are overworked and resignation but the fact is that I have a lot of privilege. I did have a lot of privilege growing up. I do have a lot of privilege. So from that perspective, I have never, honestly, a lot of the experiences that I had in corporate life, I didn't see the world that way. It's only when I became a people leader. It's only when I was applying for the promotion and I would hear things like, oh, you're not ready, or you need to build your executive presence, or you need to be, communicate in a way, or you don't have followership, that I would question. I'm like, okay, so what is the difference between this person who got the promotion and me, right? And then I would also see the biases in the people that I was managing when I would advocate for certain different people and who got what, right? So I have I have seen the good and ugly and bad, right, of all sides, both as an immigrant, as a woman, and I have done my best to my abilities. And leaders have constraints. I also understand the other side, and I'm here to show that I'm a testimony to what are the possibilities, no matter what you encounter in your life, right? So I would leave with that, hope for people that are listening, that no matter where you are, like, look for what is good in your life and build your tribe and amplify each other. Because when you are alone and you feel like life is hard or I'm competing, you don't go very far. So for me, I have had an amazing network of people, whether in my corporate life, and many of them are now entrepreneurs, or they are supporting, or they are my biggest cheerleaders, right? So I always value relationships, and that's what's basically brought me so far.
Amazing. And do you have any advice for a woman in the workplace at this time?
I have advice for women, and more so with men and leaders, right? Because I often hear for people like in product management, like, given a lot of the, so I think leaders need to sponsor more people and stop giving the crap about, excuse me my language, about, pipeline problem. We have amazing, talented, like, people, right? So they need to know people that are different than them and see how, advocate and sponsor and talk about, promote those people when those people are not in the room, right? Because that's what sometimes gets you that role, that opportunity, that, next thing. And for people that are listening who might be looking for that, that advice, I would say, be your biggest cheerleader, right? Just remember, like, how, and every time you have a doubt, like, imagine that you are the best friend, or you are your, a son or daughter, and how would you cheer them, right? How would you look at their skills and do that, like, so, and ask for things, right? So be your biggest cheerleader and ask for what you need. Nobody is a mind reader, right? And ask fully believing in you, and be willing to engage in the conversation, because life is not like a set of transactions. It's a series of relationships, right? So those are the 3 things that I would say.
Okay, that's really excellent advice. This is a little bit interesting because I've changed my question on this. Before it was like, what is on the horizon for you 2022? But we're heading towards 2023 already. That's kind of crazy. So what is on the horizon for you for 2023? Either you yourself, Knekxt, or your career?
Oh, Knekxt is my full-time business. Like, I'm the CEO and founder, and through that I provide everything, right? So my mission for the next 10 years is to impact 100 million lives in 10 years, so that we can break down the cycle of childhood abuse and trauma, and intergenerational, all of the trauma, right? So really what's in the horizon is, between now and next year, I dream of holding hands of at least 100 women who are in corporate life, who are big entrepreneurs, who are in the middle of their career, or maybe at the top of their fields, who are who are amazing rock stars, but still hiding from their shame and trauma of their abuse. I desire for more people to come up, hold hands, to show that we are fully, we are whole, we are bold, and we are here, and we are making a difference in our own different way, whether we go in product management, whether we run our companies, whether we serve as, whatever field we choose to go. Right, so that's what's in the horizon for 2022, and so I'm really doubling down on the mastermind, and as well as the corporate side, right? Because in the corporate side, I'm doing a lot of the one of the things I didn't mention is speaking. So I also do a lot of speaking in different kind of executive forums and such, and speaking not just pro bono but also paid speaking, to create awareness on some of these topics which may be very sensitive or considered not so appropriate. So those are the two areas that I'm dialing into in 2022.
So how can we find you on social media to either support you, or if a lot of the listeners may want to even be part of that circle?
Sure. So my website is knekxt.com. So it's knekxt.com. And I am on LinkedIn as Kalpashree Gupta. So that's my full name. It's Kalpashree Gupta, Gupta. You'll find me on LinkedIn. And I'm also on TikTok with the company name, knekxt.com. So you'll find me in all these platforms, and I can leave all of those in that information, Christine, in the show notes. So you'll leave your listeners can find me there, and I would love to hear from them. If any way you feel like you're the right fit and we can work together, I would love to explore that.
Well, thank you so much. We've definitely learned a lot, and I'm really excited to see what exactly Knekxt has for us.
Thank you, Christine. I so admire you creating this opportunity in this forum for others to learn more about product, as well as sharing more on, how to live more authentically.
All right. Thank you so much, and wish you best of luck and almost Happy New Year. I guess it depends on when this episode comes out.
Still have 5 months.